Happy Friday, everybody. Every Friday, I've been going over and doing a best of 3 sideboard guide for the most popular matches or archetypes in the best of 3 tournament scene. And I'm just about to call it quits, at least until rotation. So we've done a pretty good coverage, and I think the last one that I like to end on is mono red aggro. So we're going to be taking one of the lists that was a top 3 finisher in the standard challenge, actually 2 weeks in a row. And what I like to do is I like to use Untapped, which is a third-party Magic the Gathering tracker. And what this allows me to do is kind of remove my bias and remove my opinion of what cards you should be bringing in against which archetypes. It's just my preference, and I think there's some interesting insights to see. So first up here, the most popular archetype in the best of 3 tournament scene, according to MTG Goldfish, which is a different website that tracks Magic the Gathering tournament data, was Esper midrange. And here we can definitely see that Urabrask's Forge should be brought in from the sideboard. And if you want, I usually start off by covering the deck, and I got some feedback that maybe that wasn't the best way to go about it. So what I'm going to be doing is, if you guys want the deck list, it's down below in the description. Otherwise, it'll be the cards here that are on the screen. So Urabrask's Forge should come in, and then our weakest performing cards are Feldon, Ronom Excavator, as well as Phoenix Chick, in the festivities being a sideboard card. And then the other thing that the tracker allows me to do is look at alternatives and see if there are any missing from the list. And so this one was not running Slickshot Show Off and Fugitive Codebreaker and Monstrous Rage, which are all very popular picks in Best of 1 for the mono red prowess. But I do also think that they could work in Best of 3, and we'll get into that a little bit later. The other thing that I can do is I can look at how the card is performing in all archetypes instead of just specifically in mono red. And so this would pull in data from mono red prowess, for example. And we can see here that Witchstalker Frenzy is up on the top of the list. And we also note that Furnace Punisher and Lithomantic Barrage and Soul Guide Lantern don't have any data, even when I open it up to all archetypes. So notably, you know, this is a matchup that you would probably bring in Lithomantic Barrage because it's good against blue and white, and Esper midrange doesn't have a whole lot of mono black cards. They can be running like Preacher of the Schism and Graveyard Trespasser. So there are a couple of whiffs, but being able to hit Raffine for cheap is never bad. So you could bring that in, but the data does not suggest it. But what the data does suggest is that we bring in the 3 Urabrask's Forge from the sideboard, we cut the 2 Feldon Ronom Excavators and 1 Phoenix Chick, and Urabrask's Forge, without the artifact, without artifact hate, Urabrask's Forge is eventually going to seal out the game, and Esper midrange is going to be using things like Dinnick and Raffine to block your early pressure, but then has a hard time dealing with a Forge that has just gotten out of control. And Feldon Ronom Excavator, on the other hand, doesn't pair up very nicely against the 2/3 body of Dinnick, and Phoenix Chick does not push very well, considering all of the flyers that they have, especially Raffine. Next up is Azorius Control, and this one is another one that Urabrask's Forge is in the top 10, so that should probably be coming in from the sideboard. As far as the weakest performing card in the main is Obliterating Bolt, again in the festivities is a sideboard card. And then alternatives, we see that Shivan Devastator would be good, and Chandra Dressed to Kill. So there is some data that's useful for Best of 1. You'll notice that the Best of 1 list was running Chandra Dressed to Kill in my meta review, and then it was dropped. And so you can kind of use signals like that, whether or not mono red is running Chandra Dressed to Kill, is a better card to bring in when you're up against a lot of Azorius Control in the ladder. For the Best of 3 tournament scene, though, if you're really struggling against Azorius Control, could be an alternative to consider. As far as all archetypes go, nothing really pops out, particularly in the data. Still, Furnace Punisher, Lithomantic Barrage, and Soul Guide Lantern have no data in all archetypes. It's just going to be a trend. And so for Azorius Control, what I think we should be doing is bringing in the 3 copies of the Urabrask's Forge and cutting out the 3 copies of Obliterating Bolt. Again, so Azorius Control can really struggle against Urbrask's Forge if you can get it down through the counter spells. So you're going to want to pay attention about when you play it. But this is another one that just gets out of control, and Sunfalls and Depopulates and Temporary Lockdowns, all of the Wraths that Azorius Control is running don't hit Urbrask's Forge. And then Obliterating Bolt does allow you to target Planeswalkers and then exile it. We want to be pressuring our Azorius Control player instead of removing. So Obliterating Bolt is better against problematic blockers, less so for removing something like Jace or the Wandering Emperor, which you hopefully have steamrolled them before where the Planeswalker doesn't really matter if it's on the board. Next up, we have Boros Convoke, and we can see here in the festivities at the top of the list, which is a perfectly good sideboard to bring in, so we should bring in the in the festivities copies here. And then the weakest performing cards that are in the main are Obliterating Bolt. Again, Urbrask's Forge was in the sideboard. And then as far as missing options, we see a fair amount, so a lot of cards coming in from the Mono-Red Prowess deck. And the Mono-Red Prowess deck generally doing better against the Boros Convoke strategy than the Mono-Red Aggro build. And so we see like Demonic Ruckus, Shock, Slickshot Show-Off, Mechanized Warfare, which we haven't seen for a while, Voldaren Epicure, Fugitive Codebreaker, Reckless Impulse, Monstrous Rage. And then all archetypes, again, nothing of particular interest pops out here, and still the same low data issue for those three cards. And so this one is a very straightforward sideboard strategy. We bring in the 3 copies of In the Festivities, and we take out the 3 copies of the Obliterating Bolt. In the Festivities, being able to destroy all of their 1/1s, hopefully before they get their Knight Errant of Eos out, and be able to do it in response to the Gleeful Demolition on your turn, is a fantastic option to have. And then Obliterating Bolt, there's nothing that's terribly problematic in this matchup. Sanguine Evangelist, you can exile and get rid of it forever, but it's not a problematic blocker. So really, you're trying to use In the Festivities to prevent them from being able to get the Knight Errant of Eos out, which is going to be your biggest 4 toughness kind of wall to get through in mono red. And Golgari midrange is next, and we can see that this one is a good example of wanting that Obliterating Bolt to be able to clear out their early blockers. Also a good match for Urbrask's Forge. They do have Tear Asunder, which can hit it, but outside of that, the Forge can get out of control. And then the weakest card here being Phoenix Chick, not being able to, not terribly important for this matchup. And alternatives, we do see that Urbrask's Forge here again at the top of the list. Notably, again, some more cards that are typically included in Prowess, the Slickshot Show-Off and the Demonic Ruckus, as well as Shivan Devastator. So usually we see Shivan Devastator as a one-of in Best of 1 to synergize with Godric, and it could be a good alternative to explore in Best of 3. So as far as all archetypes go here, nothing really contradicting data or anything like that stands out, and we still have that same low data issue. And so this one, we're going to bring in the 3 Urbrask's Forge and take out 3 Phoenix Chick. You're starting to see a pattern here, I hope, of bringing in the Urbrask's Forge and bringing out 1 copy of something else. Some decks have a lot of versatility in what they can do in their sideboard. Mono red is a little bit more limited to that approach. But Urbrask's Forge, as I mentioned, hard for Golgari midrange outside of Tear Asunder to deal with, and then the pushing the damage early with Phoenix Chick is not particularly important in this matchup. And also, with the ability of Phoenix Chick to come back is unlikely to happen with the Graveyard Hate of like Graveyard Trespasser and such in Golgari. As far as the mirror match goes, the cards that really stand out to separate things out are Squee and Bloodthirsty Adversary. And Godric, kind of the top end, is really what you're trying to hit into. But nothing that's already in the sideboard or anything, right? All the sideboard cards are below 50% and shouldn't be brought in. Our weakest performing card is the Obliterating Bolt, which could hit Squee. And then alternatives here, we do see Shivan Devastator is another one that could be brought in, and Fugitive Codebreaker, notably not the Slickshot Show-Off, which makes sense with the Shock and Play with Fire being able to snipe the Slickshot Show-Off relatively easily. And then as far as all archetypes go, again, nothing that really stood out to me. I like to include it just in case you see something that I don't. And then, so for mono red aggro, I think the deck is relatively already built for it, and nothing really to bring in except for maybe some alternative strategies, like Shivan Devastator or Fugitive Codebreaker. And then Teamer Control has decreased in popularity, at least this week. But we can see here that Godric is the top performing card. As far as anything in the sideboard goes, nothing really standing out. Until we get to page 2, that is. And we can see here Urbrask's Forge works slightly better than the Obliterating Bolt. So we could bring in the Urbrask's Forge, which kind of helps get around the ill-timed explosion that Teamer Control is running. The question, though, being, is Urbrask's Forge actually going to be fast enough of a pace to get them before they pop off with their land combo and hit you with the World Soul's Rage? So if you get it on turn 3, maybe. And alternatives, we can see that Fugitive Codebreaker, Monstrous Rage, and Slickshot Showoff do better in this archetype as well. Again, suggesting that maybe there should be a little bit more exploration into the prowess form of mono red aggro in best of 3. And as far as all archetypes go, again, nothing that really stood out to me. Again, just including it for you guys in case you see something I didn't. And for Teamer Control, we have a pretty straightforward sideboard again. We bring in the 3 copies of the Urbrask's Forge. We take out the 3 copies of the Obliterating Bolt. And again, it's not a huge improvement to the deck. One thing that is of note, Soul Guide Lantern was missing in the data, and Soul Guide Lantern is in the deck for Teamer Control. So you probably should bring in the 3 copies of the Soul Guide Lantern over the Urbrask's Forge, because it's not a dramatic improvement. You could bring in the lanterns instead of the Forge. Still going to want to suggest cutting the Obliterating Bolt from the main. So after doing this, what I like to finish things off with is my overall impression after doing this. And Furnace Punisher, Lithomanic Barrage, and Soul Guide Lantern all had relatively low data, and so that wasn't no particular insights gained there. Now, I don't think that this is actually the best version of mono red after doing this. I think that Urbrask's Forge probably deserves a slot in the main instead of in the sideboard, as it was subbed in Esper midrange, Azorius control, Golgari midrange, and Teamer control. So 4 out of the top 6 most popular archetypes that you're going to bump into in the tournament scene, Urbrask's Forge was good. And we've seen this happen before, especially in Gruul aggro, about whether or not Urbrask's Forge is included in the main. Starting out with maybe even just 2 in the main and 2 in the sideboard, something like that, I think is good for the current meta. Obliterating Bolt, on the other hand, I think could be sided out and then brought in specifically in the matchups where it performs well. So it was subbed out in Azorius control, Boros, Convoke, and Teamer control. So there's 50% of the match where you just matches you don't want the Obliterating Bolt in your main. But it is really good against Golgari. So I'd play around with the idea of maybe treating that as a sideboard card and then bringing it in when you need it. As far as Monastery Swiftspear versus Slickshot Showoff, I think that because Mono Red's not a very popular pick, the likelihood of bumping into another Mono Red player where Slickshot Showoff is kind of that, like, the one that's going to have the most X2 hate is Mono Red. And so as long as the majority of the top 6 is you're avoiding your Mono Red matchup, I think the Slickshot Showoff might actually be better than the Monastery Swiftspear. Right, and the Slickshot Showoff is a 1/2 flying prowess, whereas the Monastery Swiftspear is a 1/2 non-flying prowess. The difference being that Monastery Swiftspear gets the +1 toughness, whereas Slickshot Showoff gets the +2/+0. So a little bit more prone to getting destroyed by X2 hate. Still something that I think I would play around personally, just running this on the best of 3 ladder on Arena. I think I might play around with Slickshot Showoff instead of the Monastery Swiftspear. And then similarly, the Phoenix Chick, I think, was relatively unimpressive. It was kind of like an okay card. There was a couple where it was in the bottom early on. And I think that the Fugitive Codebreaker could be an interesting one to explore over it. It was something that was an alternative that was missing for Esper midrange, Boros Convoke, Mono Red Aggro, and Teamer Control. So that's a pretty good spread of the meta. And then if I'm going to be bringing in the Fugitive Codebreakers and the Slickshot Showoff, I'd be really tempted to maybe explore bringing in a Monstrous Rage and maybe that would perform better than the Obliterating Bolt. But my point being that I think that there's a way that you could take this more like what we're seeing in Best of One with Prowess, without going fully into the Prowess strategy, because it is weak to interaction, right? So something to think about. Maybe there's a slot that could kind of open up for Monstrous Rage. And then Shivan Devastator, I think, also deserved a mention from the alternative lists because it was good against Azorius control and mono red aggro. I'm not sure that I would include it in the main, but I would definitely play around with the idea of maybe putting one in the sideboard for those specific matchups. So I hope that helps you understand the mono red archetype deeper and have an idea of what to do for your own best of 3 sideboard strategy. So good luck with your matches and your RCQs and tournaments, and maybe I'll see you on the ladder.